Nau mai, Hari mai. Welcome back to the Australasian Youth Justice Conference, day 2. Thanks for rejoining us. Hope you had a peaceful evening, everyone. You've joined in stream 3, which is the weaving the voice of lived experience with best practice. And we'll start with a presentation from Shaylee Matthews, My Journey in My Life, Yinnar. Shaylee is descended from the Anawine Gamil Aro nations from the Hunter Valley or Wana Urua country. And I probably mangled that pronunciation, Shaylee, so apologies for that. Shaylee's been working for youth justice in Sydney since 2017, but makes time to go back to her country to stay focused and grounded with the work, the mahi that she's doing. So over to you, Shaylee, for your presentation.
Thanks for that, Phil. Yamagaral Linda, which is hello or my in my language. So I'll be talking about my journey, my life, Yinnar. Just before I'd start, my name's Shaylee Matthews, and thanks for the introduction, Phil. I'm a proud Anawan woman, which is from a small town in Armidale, the northern tablelands of New South Wales, and a proud Gamilaroi, which is northwestern of New South Wales. My family totems are the Echidna and the Sangoana. And I currently work in Youth Justice, New South Wales, within the Aboriginal Strategic Coordination Unit, or ASCU as we like to call it. Firstly, I'd like to start my presentation by acknowledging the elders, past, present, as I'm dialing in from Darug country here in Sydney, specific Western Sydney of New South Wales. I would also like to acknowledge the Tangata Whenua of New Zealand and recognise the unique iwis in which they represent, as we all walk this journey together for our Ngapepi and our Jarjums, as they are our future. I would also like to acknowledge anyone who has lived experience with domestic and family violence. If you find any of the content triggering within my journey, my life, today, I encourage you to reach out to your employees assistance program or any other services such as Beyond Blue or Lifeline. And I'd like to thank Anibran Spirum for sharing the Gimilari language with myself and Moitu Hati for sharing the Māori language. So My Journey, My Life Yinnar, the development process of My Journey, My Life Yinnar was made up of 4 key areas: the conception, the co-design, the adaptation, and the pilot training. The purpose of this program was to develop a tool specifically for Aboriginal young females that is culturally appropriate and responsive, that addresses antisocial attitudes and beliefs, is also female specific with a strengths-based approach, and is focused on well-being and the socio-emotional aspects that we all may have. The development of this program is to meet specific needs of Aboriginal young women. It was an initiative raised at our Aboriginal Staff Conference, which we hold yearly, due to the rising numbers of offenders. The adaptation, sorry about that, the adaptation of the program was to ensure that youth justice is in collaboration with young people developing programs with a focus of their own identified needs. A specific working group was established with young people to participate and lead in the design process. All of the young females who were a part of the working group were from our Reba Youth Justice Custodial Centre, which is based in southwest Sydney. In addition to this working group, elders and community were consulted and were involved in the design to ensure the program is and will be culturally responsive to our young people. Throughout the adaptation and the pilot training, this sparked the review of My Journey, My Life in 2015, which influenced the initiative of a specific female My Journey, My Life program. My Journey, My Life was designed and targeted to respond to the needs of young Aboriginal males, specifically addressing the violent behaviour and offences associated with interpersonal relationships. The My Journey, My Life had evolved from a program called Our Journey to Respect, which focused on family violence, elder abuse, and incorporated elders and community members to support young people to create positive change. In adapting the program to Yinnar, it was important to include elders and community, as well as hearing the voices from young Aboriginal females who've had experience with domestic and family violence and violent related offences. The young people were really sharing their experiences. I would attend the centre weekly, and some of those days I would have no involvement at all. And other days it was really quite engaging, and I'd have the whole unit on board. So, roughly, that would be about 10 young girls, which included Aboriginal and non Aboriginal girls. I would give the group a pen and copies of the facilitator guide, which anyone who works in a custodial setting would understand that giving them a piece of paper or a booklet and a pen and saying you can do what you like in this really gave them the full ownership and showed them that I trusted them and that we had trust in the process. I would take notes and head back to the office and collate the content, head back to the and say to the group of girls, this is what I thought you said, this is what I heard, is this correct? So they were consulted every step of the way, from the draft to creating content to everything that the program is today. We had some really fruitful and hard hitting conversations around self respect. What does that mean to each of them? Have you seen power and control in relationships before? Have you used any types of violence to meet your own needs? And we had really, really hard hitting conversations around this. And how can you create the positive change, no matter how small it may be in your life? One small positive change is enough to, I guess, plant that seed to go, yes, I found that really empowering. We also had conversations around partner violence, and being that it was a female centre, is partner violence the same in a same sex relationship? This one we had mixed views on, and a very nice debate around this. Some of our girls had never even thought about any of these topics or discussions or had them before with their peers and workers. Throughout the process, the young people not only created the content, but were also receiving the intervention, which sparked the activities in our booklet that young people will receive when participating in the program. One of the main ideas that the girls brought up was an analogy around your own self values and beliefs. And is it the same when you're in a relationship to not in a relationship? And the analogy was, so if you're a vegetarian and your partner eats meat, and your partner's coming over for dinner and they really, really want, let's just say, a steak for namesake, are you going to go out and you're going to go buy that steak and you're going to go cook it? If you do, you therefore have changed your own self values and beliefs to please your partner. So, therefore, it has actually changed your self value and your beliefs. The young girls and women who were involved in the conversation really, it really sparked something for them, and they were just so moved by just a small little thing around that analogy around being a vegetarian and eating your own self values and beliefs. They are now to not let their own beliefs and values be altered by someone that they're in a relationship with, whether that is a partner, a family member, or a significant close to them. Itself is made up of 8 modules. The first module is introductions and relationships, and in that module we explore what is a healthy and unhealthy relationship, as well as getting to know the participants of the program at that first early stage, being mindful that not all of our Aboriginal young girls know traditionally who their mob is or where they're from. The second module is being a proud Aboriginal woman, which is more about exploring the impacts of stereotypes, exploring the changes in skills and life skills between traditional and contemporary Aboriginal cultures, and to develop tools to be a healthy young Aboriginal woman. And what does that mean to them? One of the activities within this module is hopefully to create a dilly bag, which some of you may know what that is, a weave-in basket type bag. And in that would be your toolbox. And the young girls would put their skills and everything they've learned in this. And the analogy behind that is the exterior of the grass and the way it was rough on the outside, but in the inside is the skills, and you carry that with you with what you've learned. The third module is power and relationships, and that's identifying the definitions between power and authority. Explore positive and negative understanding. Module 4, violence. To identify the violence and how it relates to power and control within relationships. To identify the impacts of violent behaviour on relationships and community. Module 5 is respect. So to develop strategies which will assist in the development of respectful non-violent relationships and identify the concepts and components of respect for others, self, and gaining respect and Module 6, separating emotions and behaviours, which is giving our young people the opportunity to develop coping strategies for high-risk times and to identify body cues and a range of feelings. Module 7, self-talk and assertive communication, to identify and encourage the use of positive communication and resolving conflict, exploring the risk and benefits of assertive, non-assertive, and aggressive communication styles, being mindful of our own non-verbal cues as well. Managing high-risk times moving forward, skills and strategies that they have learned or dilly bag, and with this module we'll complete your relapse prevention plan. And the way we went around that is, how far up the river are you? So are you starting to make change? Not quite yet ready to make change. So are you in the deep water, the shallow ends, or on the banks? There's an analogy that the girls really took to. Before, each participant of the program receive a workbook which highlights and assists in creating that positive. So one activity in particular that the girls were vocal about placing in the program was listening to a song around relationship violence, domestic and family violence, having the lyrics printed out and while listening to this song. And for them, exploring, where have they seen these types of behaviour? Is it in their own relationships, or in their parents or carers' relationships? And what are the skills we can use to do that, and just to identify mindful and being care of our. Another activity was around emotional charades. So our young girls really stating that women in general like to use non-verbal body cues. So this activity is to pick an emotion and act it out and see if your fellow peers can pick out your emotion. The spirit figure you see in this slide here was created by our in enhancing the figure we'd already had by adding the green dots in the stomach area, which for them meant connection to Mother or Mother Earth, maternal mother and grandmother through embryo form, and the intergenerational trauma that could be passed on. And lastly, follow your gut instinct. Another target emerged from the transparency and commitment of the young people working group. The young people to develop self-healing and self-determination in leading their own positive change in life whilst learning through culture. The pilot training was conducted from around the state. This process was to hear our practitioners and how they felt, as we'd already heard from our young people. So you'll see two extracts from staff training, and in closing, I'd just like to share a young person's journey with you. So she's 17, was part of the co-design, had a number of offences around aggravated assault, robberies, malicious offences, motor vehicle offences. Her interests were art, dancing, listening to music, and I think like all teenagers, on social media. So she in parental rights to the minister in community services care for 2 years. Her foster father and biological father had passed away in 2013, 2014. And she had a strained relationship with her mum and connected with her father. At the age of 15, she was also kicked out of school for fighting and has a comorbidity of cannabis, ice, and heroin use. So whilst girl would share her cultural knowledge, her personal experiences in power and control in relationships, what she feels is healthy and unhealthy. And after reading the draft facilitator's guide, which is now endorsed and training's been rolled out, she stated and cried, "I need this program in my life, even though because I helped writing it, seeing it in person is a lot different. Um, and I will forever be grateful for the young people for allowing me to walk alongside of them in this journey. The conversations we had was something I'll be forever grateful, and I just want to acknowledge them and say thank you for letting me be involved in your life and listening to your personal stories. Um, my contact details are here on the screen now if you guys would like to reach out or know further information about the program. Thank you.
I can't see any questions in the live Q&A, so I just remind participants that you can add questions at any time. You can have discussions with each other in the discussion section, but if you post questions in the Q&A, I can see those and I can feed them. But while I'm waiting, in case anybody asks any questions, Shelley, um, how much was your own background and your experience important in establishing the connection to the young people, the young women particularly, that you were working with?
Yeah. Oh, Phil, I think it was really important. Being a young person who made some bad choices herself, and being where I work now, and that's the reason why I chose to work for youth justice, is to help that change. Um, and if willing to do what I'm willing to do with these young people and listen to their stories in a non-judgmental way, um, maybe I'd be a better version of myself. Not that I'm not a good one putting it out there for everybody, but I think that it really shows and helps build that rapport with our young people, that they know that even though you make these bad choices and decisions, that things will look a lot better when you work within inner yourself and learn more.
Yeah. The questions come through. What do you love most about this work?
The fact that it helps me stay grounded, and hearing those experiences and the stories, I think I couldn't pick a bad thing to aspect of what I do and with the young people, to help them understand culturally who they are, but also um, in that journey. Like I said in my presentation, I didn't walk in front of them or behind them. I really walked beside them and got the path that we're all on.
How much do you think that the cultural components helped get their engagement in the course and in the modules? How important was the cultural element to that?
Oh, for our Aboriginal young girls, I think it's really important. Like I'd said in my presentation, some of our young girls are of traditionally where their people were from, and being so transient, being in a custodial environment, it was let's learn through culture. Let's take elements and what we know about our culture and use those to help affect that change.
And then there's a question about what were the biggest barriers or the things that got in your way as you tried to do this work in this way through the engagement with the elders and the young people? Were there any barriers you had to overcome?
I think it was time constraints. That would have been a massive barrier. The need of a female specific violent offence focus intervention is something that we needed for a long time. So when we like when is happening, when is it going to be finished? But believing and trusting in the process and the experiences of our young people is what made it where it is today.
Thank you. We're almost at the end of our session. So, Shaylee, a couple of people are asking, they came late to the session. Is it recorded? Is it available later? Yes, it is. And people have asked questions which we haven't had time for. So you're able to go into the questions. And if you like, you can write a response yourself to those questions. So we can carry on the conversation. But thank you for something that was delivered with passion and great deal of insight. And I know that you were not an experienced presenter, so this was a challenge for you. So thank you for sharing. Kia ora.
Shell.
Hi, we now go on to our second presentation, and this is a presentation from Shelley Turner, and Shelley's going to be talking about co-producing knowledge, adding to our knowledge base by involving justice experienced young people. And Shelley's a senior lecturer at Monash University, teaching social work and criminology. And she was also clinical manager at Australia's first ever youth drug and alcohol court, which is a really important piece of mahi in her kite, in her curriculum. And also very interested in young people's experience from their perspective on case management. So I'm handing over to Shelley now for the presentation. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Good morning, and thank you very much for being here today. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands on which we are gathered, and I'm speaking to you from Naarm in Melbourne. I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional custodians of this unceded land on which I work and live. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders present, and also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who might be here today. So the focus of my presentation is co-production in youth justice. I've been interested in understanding and learning from, and more importantly, acting on young people's perspectives and their experiences of youth justice services for many years now. I'm drawing today on my own experiences of trying to co-produce knowledge with young people in youth justice in various ways, as well as the work I've been doing over the past couple of years with 4 other social work and criminology academics in writing a book about co-production and criminal justice. And just for a shameless plug, the book will be out next year. The book entailed a comprehensive review of the existing research and the academic literature about co-production and criminal justice. And it also has an examination of several case studies which provide practical examples of co-production in criminal justice contexts. So my talk today is really a critical reflection, or if you like, a meander through my current thinking on the opportunities and challenges that co-production can bring us for working better with children and young people in youth justice. So while much is written and said about justice-involved young people in the public discourse, very rarely are their own voices and lived experiences actually included. As Judge John Walker said to us yesterday, we need to involve young people in the events and decisions that impact them. We need to bring them along with us. Directly involving justice young people and children in the design and delivery of youth justice services emphasises in a really significant way that they are worthy of being listened to. Currently, lived experience is receiving a surge of recognition as an important source of knowledge for building a holistic evidence base for health and human services practice and policy, including, albeit very slowly, in criminal justice contexts. I think this is a welcome development, especially after decades of a fairly narrowly defined what works agenda that has largely excluded lived experiences even worth knowing about. Lisa Ward yesterday talked about the importance of including lived experience as a source of evidence for policy making in youth justice. So when we talk about, as the title of my presentation does, co-producing knowledge, we are in a sense talking about how we know what we think we know about criminal justice and youth justice, and what knowledge and whose knowledge counts, and what and whose knowledge doesn't count or we choose to leave out. While lived experience alone doesn't answer what works to reduce recidivism, it does help answer this question by providing texture, colour, and depth to the answer, in the same way that it has contributed to the findings and recommendations of various recent reviews and royal commissions of youth justice systems in Australia. In those reviews, the voices of young people were critical. Lived experience helps us understand what works when, where, for whom, and why. It makes us pay attention to the experience of justice, to human rights and what it means to be human, a young human in our systems of justice. It can be an important avenue through which to realise or help realise the intentions of Article 12 of the UN Conventions on the Rights of the Child, for children to express their views about matters that pertain to them and for these views to be considered by decision makers. However, as I'm going to explore with you, the statutory context of youth justice does pose some very specific ethical and practical challenges for those who are seeking to engage in co-production endeavours and learn from young people's accounts of their lived experiences. Let's just take a step back for a moment and ask, what is co-production? It's a term that really seems to be popping up everywhere. And for those of you who, like me, have been in lengthy lockdowns and watching Ted Lasso, it's a bit like Roy Kent. Co-production is here, it's there, it's every bloody where. There are varying definitions, but at a minimum, co-production is an approach to working together in equal partnership for equal benefit. In health and human services, it involves service providers partnering with service users to define, design, deliver and evaluate policies, programs or services. Despite its newfound popularity though, co-production is not really new. It's embedded in some old ideas, notably those about citizenship and participatory approaches to governance. These ideas are often illustrated using Einstein's ladder of citizen participation, which you can see here on your screen. The ladder describes different levels of public participation and can easily be adapted to describe how providers of public services engage with stakeholders. Einstein's ladder has 8 steps of participation, ranging from non-participation at the bottom to tokenistic or symbolic participation right up to the top to real or genuine participation. Her intention with the ladder is to show how undeserving or have-not citizen groups are exploited in government decision-making processes. The 2 bottom rungs are manipulation and therapy. Manipulation refers to putting stakeholders on rubber stamp advisory committees or advisory boards, while therapy involves changing the stakeholders' view of the problem. Informing, consultation and placation are somewhat weak forms of participation, although they can be the first steps in genuine participation. But they don't constitute this on their own, and they can be tokenistic if real participation is promised and not delivered. Examples of informing and consultation include surveys, meetings, and while placation involves working with a few hand-picked worthy stakeholders, or so-called poster children maybe for youth justice, they are not accountable or representative of the broader stakeholder group, so they lack the numbers and the legitimacy to wield any actual influence. Partnership, delegated power and citizen or service user control constitutes genuine or real participation and involves power sharing and joint decision making. I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but for our purposes today, it's enough to note that the top levels of the ladder, real participation, is typically linked to genuine co-production, while the lower levels of the ladder are linked with tokenistic or transactional forms of co-production, or as my colleague and friend Dr. Maggie Hall from UNSW calls it, faux co-pro. To further answer what is co-production, there's real co-production largely means that people are truly involved in planning and designing services from the very beginning. It involves service users or people with lived experience as equal partners with equal participation and decision-making power. It is, as this diagram shows, all kinds of co-planning, co-designing, co-delivering, co-evaluating. Importantly, co-production is not just co-design. These terms are often used interchangeably, but the key difference between the two is centred around the level of delegation. Co-production features people with lived experience as shared decision-making, but co-design features people with lived experience as having a strong influence on the decision-making process, but not necessarily setting the agenda. So for us, with its emphasis on equal partnerships and equal power sharing, the question is, in youth justice and other statutory settings, how co can you really go? I ask this question because co-production has risen alongside consumer rights movements and it's associated with notions of the empowered consumer or customer, able to choose their own goods and services. These ideas are particularly prevalent and have driven service reforms in aged care and disability services, for example, where consumers are able to have a choice of service packages. However, young people in youth justice don't have a set of justice service packages to choose from. They are involuntary, mandated, coerced, statutory clients. This is an important divergence from the ideas of participatory citizenship that are inherent to Arnstein's ladder. A further key ethical challenge for co-producing knowledge with children and young people is the disparities in power and status between them and adults. These disparities are amplified in statutory systems like youth justice. The adults are cast as the expert, reliable, law-abiding, deserving of having an opinion and having it listened to. In contrast, the child, as the young offender, is unreliable, undeserving of being listened to. As Lisa Ward described it yesterday, wrongdoers who have forfeited their right to be heard and listened to. Yet paradoxically, the very same young people are also cast as vulnerable and sometimes sort of wrapped in cotton wool. And we have a strange ambivalence about this, at least in Australia, whether we conceptualise youth and levels of responsibility as justice problems or welfare problems. Lisa Ward also pointed to this ambivalence yesterday, noting that despite all the brain science evidence, we don't consistently treat children and young people as different to adults. There's perhaps no clearer indication of this ambivalence than in the way that we gatekeep and limit access to children and young people in youth justice. A topic for longer discussion, but I do just want to note the contradictions in the way we require external researchers, for example, to obtain parental consent to involve youth justice clients under the age of 14 or 16 in research that might clearly have benefits for their lives. A requirement for parental consent can often mean that only the young people able to access parental support can participate in research and contribute, therefore, to knowledge co-production, while more marginalised young people without parental support are essentially excluded. The arguments are valid for needing to obtain parental consent in that young people don't always know what they're signing up to. Fair enough, this is important. But aren't these the very same young people who are apparently old enough to understand the implications of their offending behaviour at the age of 10? So I'm not questioning the need for informed consent, but I am noticing the inconsistencies. So moving back to the idea of power imbalances, there are three main ways to mitigate power imbalances between adults and children and young people. The first is reciprocity. This is generally accepted in research and other relationships, including, for example, in forensic mental health settings in Australia, which operate according to mental health legislation, where consumers are paid for their time when they're involved in co-production endeavours. There's currently no agreed position on whether children and young people and those involved in the criminal justice system should be paid for participating in research or policy co-design activities. The second way to mitigate power imbalances between adults and children is through power in numbers. Where possible, adults should engage children and young people as a group rather than as individuals. However, in youth justice settings, privacy legislation and policies to protect the identity of children make this impractical at best and illegal at worst. Last, but certainly not least, is the importance of responsive communication. And I'm not going to spend much time on this because there are a lot of presentations at this conference that talk about this. As Judge John Walker said yesterday, we have to adapt our language and ways of communicating. Finally, I just want to mention a couple of points about telling a story. At the heart of many co-production endeavours in criminal justice settings with adults is the idea or justification around telling a story in order to re-narrate your story. For many people involved in youth justice, they have a tarnished identity and want to be able to tell a redemption story, a story where they can re-narrate their lives through a strength-based lens, identifying resilience and hope. This is aligned with approaches like narrative therapy and trauma-informed care, and is evident, for example, in the Bird's Eye View podcast series, which was co-produced with women in the Darwin Correctional Centre. While there's clearly therapeutic value in this, which could also benefit children and young people, it highlights the importance of the need for time, trust, and relational continuity to do this well. And these, as we heard yesterday, are the very elements that are often lacking in our work with youth justice clients, especially in statutory settings. It also highlights the challenge of developing a lived experience identity as a child or young person. While it's helpful to think of lived experience as a form of expertise, it's also worth asking if this is the identity we want to promote to children and young people. While we want to destigmatise criminal justice involvement, the sad reality is it is stigmatising and limiting, even in practical ways such as having a criminal record that hinders employment. Having a lived experience identity can stick forever. It could be a stigma that stays. For some young people, this might be empowering, but for others it may be oppressive. There's also the risk that the shared redemption story becomes a reoffending story and a further sense of failure. So there is a great deal of complexity in lived experience for a child or a young person. And arguably, very arguably, they haven't had enough lived experience to have expertise. This is evident even in the way we think of rehabilitation as habilitation for children and young people. That is, learning new skills and having new experiences for the very first time. This is an excerpt from a talk by Dr. Lem Sisay, Chancellor of the University of Manchester and an award-winning poet and spoken word performer. He spent 18 years of his life in the UK out-of-home care system. In this excerpt, he's talking about his care experiences when he was 12 years old and his thoughts on giving voice to children. I encourage you to follow the link at some point and listen to the talk because he can tell it better than me. The important thing here is that his surprise at the age of 12 of being told that we need to give you a voice. We need to give you a voice so that you can tell us what you want. So finally, as Lem Sisay would agree, we should reach for the stars. We should aim for genuine co-production with children and young people in youth justice. Our intentions need to be noble. We need to be authentic and genuine. At the same time, though, there has to be no bull. Downplaying rather than acknowledging our power can potentially have a patronising effect. And this is particularly pertinent to co-production endeavours in statutory contexts where it's dubious at least to suggest that the service users, children and young people hold power that is equal to or greater than ours. Power that is acknowledged can at least be held to account. Power that is denied can become unlimited, essentially gaslighting. So in doing so, we would be substantially better than we are now if we aimed for real co-production, but only landed on real consultation. Indeed, in his talk, Lem goes on to note the importance of feedback, of having a say in how things are done. For all our lofty goals towards co-production, most of our youth justice systems don't have effective consumer or service user feedback systems and often lack basic mechanisms of genuine external accountability and oversight. As Lem Sisay reminds us, with our power too comes responsibility. We need to be clear about why we want to engage in this shiny new thing called co-production with youth justice kids. They might have some answers to the problems we've created, but we have the power and the responsibility to make the changes that we know are needed to our systems and practices. Thank you very much.
A couple of questions coming through mainly on the same theme, which is about different ways of using tools and techniques to really engage young people, particularly those with the communication skills, which people were pointing yesterday. Yeah, yesterday was a day which asked us all to think again about neurodiversity and how we engage people at various levels. So people are saying, how have you thought about that?
Yes, I think I've thought about it for many years, and I think the material by Pamela Snow and her colleagues is really critical in terms of understanding the oral language capabilities of young people in youth justice. So some of the creative ways that I've seen are through using approaches like photo voice, the artworks and the various things that have been created even at this conference, and also engaging young people in program design. I guess the key issue for me is that we be careful that we don't try to shift our responsibility for this onto the young people. Sometimes in youth justice and other settings, we get excited about a new idea or a new concept like co-production, and we need to be careful that we're not putting responsibility onto the young person for their rehabilitation.
Thank you. One of the things that I was thinking of as I was listening to you from a cultural perspective is that very real tension between the right of a young person to be the authority and the author of their own lives, but parental responsibilities. And as a Western man, I come into that conversation with very particular views about parental responsibility and family structures. But in First Nation communities, Indigenous communities, and certainly in Maori communities, the concept of whānau and whānau responsibility is as important as the rights of the individual. So how do you think we can overcome sort of giving young people agency and authority in the context of their family?
Oh, I feel if I had the answer to that, I think I'd be doing very well. I think that is indeed, you've hit the heart of the tension of working in youth justice and working with children and young people generally. And I think these are the issues that are not often well explored in the literature that tends to only think about adults and empowered adults. Because indeed, in many ways, we, as the state, become the parents of the young people that we're working with. I'm conscious of the time, so I'd be happy to continue the discussion beyond today.
Thank you for that, Shelley. I know we are running out of time now, but thanks for the presentation. Lots of
You're welcome.
thoughtfulness in there to take away. People are still writing comments and questions, so when we stop going live, you can answer yourself online if you like.
Thank you.
So thank you. Right. So our next speaker, Justin Power. My family, our decisions, our way, which I think segues nicely to the last question that I asked of Shelley about the importance of individual responsibility and also collective whānau family responsibility. So Justin is from the Birigubur Juru, and also traces heritage back to uh, Yinnar and Biri peoples, which is basically in northern Queensland. So apologies, Justine, if I've mangled the pronunciation of your mobs, but Justin is currently working in Queensland Youth Justice, and he's the principal officer providing cultural advice and intelligence to youth justice services. So kia ora and welcome, Justin.
That introduction there, and you did work very well to announce my mob's names. And I'd like to bring greetings on behalf of my mob, the Birigubur people of Northern Queensland, and we'd say Watamuli Watatalagari, which is hello and good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Justin Power. I'm currently working in QATSIP as the Director of Program Implementation and Performance. My role is to work with community-controlled organisations to implement programs and help support the delivery of those programs at the community-based level. But as it is proper and custom to do so, I want to acknowledge country. And today I'm presenting on the beautiful lands of the Yagara peoples, whose country stretches south of the Meanjin, or otherwise known as Brisbane River. I also acknowledge the lands of the Turrbal people, who are north of the Brisbane River, and identify these lands, the waters and skies are and remain a significant part of their cultural existence. And I recognise their elders, past, present, and emerging. And their strength, their resilience, perseverance, and wisdom invites us all to reflect on our own journey here today. I'd also like to acknowledge the many nations represented here at this forum. If I could make a special shout out to our deadly staff here at QATSIP for their ongoing support and commitment to working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, families, and community here in Queensland. Also to our community controlled sector, but in particular to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Community Health Services here in Brisbane, Kabingai Family Youth Development, who are also based here in Brisbane, Gulbury Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Advancement in Toowoomba, and our partners, Woodchopperan Health Services in Cairns, who are either online watching today, and so I want to make a mention of them, and also to the department, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Cultural Unit with the Department of Children, Youth Justice and Multicultural Affairs, for their ongoing support and commitment to the work that we're doing with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and communities. So a little bit about kind of who we are and what we do. So QATSIP stands for the Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Protection Peak, and our role primarily is to promote and advocate for the rights, safety and well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, young people and families. And we work with over 35 community-controlled organisations who really are the living embodiment of the aspirations of my mob in our pursuit and our struggle for self-determination. Each organisation provides services, advice and support in child, youth and family well-being in a holistic approach. And yeah, they're really the backbone of what we do. So my presentation today, I really am going to just yarn with you about my family, our decision, our way, and some of the things I want to cover off on are some of the background context to the program. So why we're doing this, and that historical impacts and how they've set up, I guess, the trajectory of our young people and our families today. We're going to look at some of the program itself, and so some of those elements include the why, the what, when, and how our young people and our families access our services and programs. One of the big part of our journey in kind of collaboration and co-design is our program logic, and I just want to speak very briefly about that as it's a part of our roadmap to our success, and it really tells the story in and of itself. And we'll hopefully have I'll have a video at the end to just show some of the stories and program impacts, or you'll hear from some of the service providers there as well. So let's dive right into it. Some of the overarching context I'd like to just bring to attention, and I imagine in most cases this is not a surprise. So in Australia and in Queensland, Aboriginal and Torres Strait young people are more likely to be incarcerated today than at any other time since the release of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody final report, which was released in 1991. Contact with the criminal justice system represents symptoms of the broader social and economic disadvantage faced by my people today. And those symptoms are due to colonisation, separation and assimilation policies, which has resulted in significant intergenerational trauma, poverty, social and emotional burden for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I guess in this part, I just want to pause for a moment just to share a bit of my own experience in some of those impacts. My grandmother was born under the what was at the time the or lived under, should I say, the Aboriginal Protection and Restriction of the Sale of Opium Act, and that's a mouthful here in Queensland. It's now abolished, but I guess some of the impacts in those policies led to the control of Aboriginal people, managing their affairs for them, and removing, I guess, that control from their way of living, their society, and that ancient way that I'll speak about a little bit earlier. Excuse me. Speak about a little later. So it was these policies that were set up that really, really sadly set a trajectory for our people in fighting for rights, in fighting for to be heard, and that again connects to the program itself. It also created um, uh, basically these policies were set up and put in place that went against our ancient ways of living and our existence, and didn't conform to colonization and the way that this new world was evolving, and which set up structural and institutional racism. So not having our own control over our own lives and our own destinies, or our own language, even our own lands, but rather having other ways of living and experiencing life imposed upon us. And these are the things that have, I guess, drive this program that I'm going to talk a bit more about, why it's important, why it should be as a part of the things that we do when we work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia and certainly in Queensland. The past negative experiences of Aboriginal people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have had with the child safety systems and justice. I mean, those earlier impacts have had ongoing effects to the experiences our people have had with child safety, with the justice system, and they weren't designed for our mob. Forced removals was as a result of some of these systems, from families and from country, from language, from communities, which resulted in, as we all know, stolen generation. But nevertheless, and again, despite these horrific impacts of it, trauma and disruption to our culture, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, our families, still demonstrate a resilience and strength in our survival today. And that's why we're in a unique position. We've survived 60,000 years, and even right up until this point, we're still surviving and pushing through, because we have something that's in us that we need, that society and government need to hear and understand, respect and acknowledge. Some interesting stats that I'll throw up, and I'll be very quick with them. But I guess they're important because they speak to the ongoing impacts. And so, Australian the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare released some information around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander statistics, and 8% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders aged 10 to 17 or made up the general population, but 59% of those were under some type of youth justice supervision. And this was an increase of previous years, particularly in 2015 to 16, where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders only made up 55% of those on some kind of supervision order. Another interesting statistic that is, again, speaks alarming to some of those impacts is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representation was higher in detention, in fact, 20 times higher than non-Indigenous rates. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children represented 63% of young people living in detention. And that's why it's important we have a program that speaks to my family, our decisions, our way, that is really taking a family-led decision principles and a process and applying that into a youth justice context. But here are some of the things of why this program is needed. We heard about some of the impacts, but how do we overcome that? And the program operates by helping young people and families in crisis, especially because there's a lot of stuff going on for them at the one time. And as you can see by the diagram in front of you, that at the heart of it, at the heart of the program and at the heart of what we do here at Quatsit, but also our community sector is young people, family and the community. The program really helps families and community exercise self-determination by giving them an opportunity to have their say. As I talked about earlier, my grandmother never had a chance to have her say. She had to write away to government policies, to government officials, sorry, to be able to access her money. In fact, whatever little money she did get, be able to leave her community, be able to marry who she wanted to, but also be able to live and experience and express her culture was stripped away. So this program really sets up an opportunity to have families speak about their worries and their concerns, and to be done or to be supported in what decisions they come up with. And so that's the other part of that program, of this program, is that families can be supported to make decisions, but also acknowledged and validated that that decision is best for them, not because I say so or because a department or somebody else says so, but because it fits their needs. And we hope to strengthen and grow confidence in our families and in our young people. The program also helps young people and families to drive their own change and to determine what success looks like for them. It's not going to be the same in a city community or a rural community. It's going to be very different in a remote or really remote community or even urban community. So there's different ways of measuring success, but what is it that the families determine that? And that's what this program is designed to do. Giving people and families the strength, the empowered to make decisions, but also to feel that they can contribute and know that they can contribute, because it's within them the solutions to these ongoing challenges that are not in anything else but within the family. And it's about unpacking that and tapping into that. Oh, gee, my goodness, this time is okay. The program is based on family-led decision-making principles, and I guess what benefit is the program has to families is that it's a culturally safe and appropriate way of engaging with families and young people. We facilitate yarns and meetings in a way that makes sense for them. And through that yarn or through that discussion, we develop up a plan that really helps determine what supports are needed, what are the worries, what are the concerns, and what who do they need to lean on to help achieve that plan. We work closely with the Department of Youth Justice, as I mentioned earlier, as a way of working collaboratively to address, youth crime and yeah, people at risk of entering that system. And it's a way of and our way of working is in open communication and transparency. And we participate in a number of case reviews too to help set up the best way forward for our families and our young people, hearing from them. Importantly, the program is voluntary and it also is separate to the department. So whilst we work closely with them, it is of itself a program that's done and delivered by community and has that community focus on that. The when and how, I guess, is really important. So, and I'm coming to the end of this. I apologize if I've gone over a little bit too long, but I guess it's really important that young people access it if they're engaged with the criminal justice system or at risk of engaging the systems. They are at risk of disengagement from their education and learning. Also, if they're already disengaged, they can have access. They can access this program, or if they've had interactions with police. And young people can access it anywhere along the youth justice continuum. So, as part of their community-based orders, part of their transition plans out of youth detention, or if they're undertaking a restorative justice process. The uniqueness about this program is that it's really driven by community, and it's shifting the control from government to the community to help address community needs. And so we have skilled staff who have knowledge of family. So the community control sector is well placed because they know family, they know community, they can locate family. They have really culturally experienced and intelligent workers and a skilled workforce. And the thing that QWATSIP does in this space is also provide support and guidance to the community controlled organisations. And to wrap up, this is what you see in front of you is our program logic. It may look very busy for you, so apologies on that. But I just want to highlight, our overall aim for this program. And whilst we're still working through a few things to really redefine or perhaps even define what family-led decision making or my family, our decisions, our way best sits. We still have the goals of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We need our young people to feel strong culturally, but also in their way of being who they are. So having cultural self-identity and cultural strength. We want to work better with the youth justice system to better support our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and young people. And ultimately, we want to make sure that our young people are not overrepresented in the system, but are getting the supports and services they need to make better lifestyle choices and contribute, because it's in them. It is in our mob to do their very best. And it's all they need is an opportunity, because they're really asking for help or for support doesn't mean that you've failed. It's actually that it means that you're not in it alone. So that's really what this is about. I do have a video I'm happy to play that just highlights some of the workers that are working with us and working with our family. So without further ado, I'll press the play button so we can hear from our workers.
Tara Johnson. My family come from southwest Queensland, and my nan's grew up on the Blue River. I'm a colourly woman, and living here
I think
in
it's having some
Toowoomba,
technical difficulties.
like
so I'll pause it there because it doesn't seem like it's wanting to work or play nicely in this space. But that was just some feedback and insight into some of the work that's happening on the ground. So that concludes my presentation. So thank you.
The video couldn't play at the end there, but I'm sure we can find a way of uploading it onto this platform and having it in the swag bag or something so people can watch it. Thanks for that, and a timely bringing to the front of our minds again the intergenerational trauma and impact of racism, bias, and colonization. And that will inform the collective memories of First Nation people, Aboriginal people, when people who haven't had that experience are trying to engage and work with them. So a very thoughtful presentation. We are over time. We're running a tight time scale today. If there are any questions in the Q&A, I couldn't see any. You can go into the Q&A when you're offline and just answer those or respond to any people who put comments in the discussion. But thanks for your presentation, and to everyone else on stream now. That concludes this stream, and we'll be back at I think it's 12:30 for the plenary discussion. So enjoy the break and see you after that. Kia ora.
Thanks, Phil.